This is the Retirement Planning University podcast with Jordan Schwartz and Phillis Pulvinas.
Welcome back to the Retirement Planning University podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Schwartz, and I'm here today with my co-host, Phillis Pulvinas. Phillis, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Good to be here with you. Let's have some fun.
I'm really excited about this, Phillis, because we have the first guest on our podcast today. We have a very special guest, someone who I've known for almost a decade. He's an advisor with Strategic Wealth Designers. Many of you know him through our YouTube show, Taste of Retirement, lead financial advisor and executive chef, Rob DeLessio. Rob, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Glad to join. Thanks for having me. I guess this is the right kind of forum for me. My wife has always said I have a face for radio, so maybe we can say I have a face for podcasts, something like that.
Well, Rob, you have a great voice, and we're excited to hear what you have to say too. Phil, this is an interesting thought to me, and you got a grandkid. Rob, you got some younger kids, different ages, middle school, high school. What are you doing to prepare your kids for retirement in the future and kind of planning in this, kind of crazy world we're in now? That's
actually a great question. One of the things that we've taught our children to do, I've got an 18, a 16, a 13, and a 9-year-old. So we're strong in our faith. So obviously we believe in giving back. So we definitely make sure that they give a percentage of whatever money they generate to some type of charity, not necessarily a church, but some type of charity. And then candidly, we basically tell them to live off of half of what they make. So 2 of them have jobs.
Oh, cool.
And then the other 2 actually do ancillary chores to earn things like paying for Xbox games or shoes or whatever it may be.
Cut the grass kind of stuff, things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're too lazy to cut the grass, let's be honest. So we're talking about really, really easy, mundane things, but stuff that I don't want to do. But either way, the 2 that do have actual employment, we've opened up Roth accounts for them. Those that may or may not know, that allows that money. It's after tax dollars that allows that money to grow tax-free. If they go to buy a house later on, they could actually take that money out tax-free to pay for the down payment, or just continue to let that generate. So I want them to just really focus on some tax planning as well as just generating growth. But if I can teach them at this young age of 18 and 16 to literally live on half of what they're bringing in, then they're never going to miss the money that they never had. And so that's the big takeaway that we're trying to instill in them. So if they bring in a $500 paycheck, I want them to give about $40-$50 to some level of charity, and then maybe, live off that $220 and then spend the rest, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but they still live in my house. So their expenses aren't very much either.
That's great to have that concept, because I think today, a lot of kids grow up without understanding what they really need to know about money, and it should start early. And the power of compounding, that's a total new concept to so many kids today, and it's crazy. That's great you have them doing the Roth.
Yeah, it's just something that I think is really, really strong. And it's something that candidly our education system fails. I think a lot of times the schools focus on things like calculus and all these other things that obviously have value in the fields that they do. But I'd also like them to know how to balance a checkbook and how to make sure they keep the lights on.
Yeah, practical stuff. Exactly.
Yeah. Rob, that's perfect, man. And I think what's so interesting is I agree with you. I think our education system has really failed, America's financial literacy. And that's really, Phil, what you and I are talking a lot about on this. And, one question that comes to mind, when you're doing your planning and your preparation with your clients, how do you tie in education with also, helping them with their retirement? How do you think those 2 things kind of work hand in hand with one another?
Well, the good part is a lot of the people that I've met with, they've seen us at some type of event that is a very high level education. So that's piqued their interest. And then when they come in, it's really just getting to know them, right? Because a lot of people that we see is, I'm in the Houston area, so a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors, a lot of things like that. And these people have a ton of formal education, but really mostly don't know a lot about, investing and how to become more tax efficient and how to leave a legacy behind. And so it's really finding out what makes them tick, right? What are their wants, their needs, their desires? Maybe, some of them want to leave as big of a legacy behind as possible. That's awesome. Maybe some of them want to be like my dad and want their last check to bounce. That's okay too. Right? Either one's okay. But I need to know that because that's going to let me know what direction I need to go to provide the most value for them, and really telling them the why we do what we do and how the mechanics work so that they can fully understand it and feel comfortable in making a decision.
It's so interesting about that, Rob. In today's day and age, to me, the most constant for a retiree, someone who's retiring, within the last 5 years or in the next 5 years, the concept to me that is most consistent is that of change. Right, the world has changed so incredibly much in the last 2-3 years, and what it's probably going to look like in the future. How do you think that is going to influence how planning changes in the future and things that we're looking at differently? Where, to your point, it's the answer is it's not cookie cutter. It's customized and it's specific, and it has a large focus on education.
That's a tough question. I mean, it's hard to tell because nobody has a crystal ball. Very interesting. Just looking at the world that we live in 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, nobody knew what a QR code was. Nobody ever DocuSigned anything. You know what I mean? Nobody even really knew what Zoom was. And now everybody's kind of comfortable that way. So my hopes are in the future that people will get more comfortable in doing things that maybe aren't popular, but that are definitely better for them. There's many places out there that people can invest their money and just do it cookie cutter like everybody else. That doesn't mean it's the best thing for them. So I'm really excited about the future and excited about the opportunities in regards to really coming up with, and I hate to use the pun, but a strategic way for people to retire.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does start, like you said, with understanding what their goals are. And a big thing, I'm sure you guys find out the same thing is a lot of times with what we do, people don't know what they don't know. Educated, smart people don't know the changes that they have to make. They've never considered them about becoming more tax efficient as they age and not just growing the money, but keeping it. So, our educational approach is so important. And the other thing that I find, and I know you guys do as well, we teach a class and we're always telling them that it's not rocket science. It isn't. What we do isn't rocket science, but if they don't know, how can they be prepared? So as a team, we have to know what they want, and they have to know what they need to solve for to accomplish that. And as things evolve, if you have a good roadmap, as things evolve, monitor it together and discuss it together. But them having a partner to bring those things to the table makes a lot of sense. But as you said, Rob, when they know the why, that really goes a long way to be open-minded.
100%. A lot of times when I'm, teaching the class or maybe even just meeting with individuals one-on-one, I'll ask them just, point blank questions. Do you know how much you're paying penny-wise, in regards to fees? And the answer, you guys know, is always no. Do you know how much your downside risk is? Do you know, what your tax applications are? And the answer to all those questions are always no. And then you'd say, but 5 minutes ago, you would have said that you had a retirement plan. And then what I do is I love to use analogies. And so I sit there and I say, okay, so when you went to buy a house, did you know how much it cost? Yes. Did you know how much the insurance was going to be? Yes. Do you know how much the taxes are going to be? Yes. The interest rate on your loan, if you had one? Yes. So you had a plan in place to pay off that house? Yes. But we don't have a plan in place for retirement. And so it's kind of like shining that light, right? And now they know. And at that point, to use the old cliche term from when I was a kid watching cartoons on G.I. Joe, knowing's half the battle.
So do you think when it comes to planning for retirement, maybe one of the biggest issues that most people run into, it can obviously be not good investments in their portfolio, but maybe it's the communication between them and their advisor or who they're working with, where they have a tangible grasp on what their plan is, what their goals are, where they're trying to get to for retirement?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I also think part of it is brand recognition. I really, truly do. You have people that are working with certain companies in their 401ks, and then it's just they've had their 401k for 25 years and they move it over to them for retirement planning. Well, that's not really putting a plan together. Or all these massive companies whose names are on the side of stadiums that everybody knows, they're the ones that they see on commercials, so that they think, well, I need to invest with them. That doesn't necessarily think that it's best, because they'll just go throw their money in there. And all those people are trying to do is just accumulate that money. they're not really trying to plan. To me, it's if you can come up with a comprehensive plan where, like we talked about earlier, the client understands the reasoning behind it and can see the actual value, then that's everything that we need to do.
Yeah, shine the light on what they really need to pay attention to and show them that where they're not, like not knowing your fees. Wow. That's huge. I mean, as you're accumulating money, you're busy, you're working, in the 401k, it's a great, easy place to save it. So you can't really pay attention to, even if you knew your fees, you're probably going to put the money there. But as you get closer to retirement or when you leave a company, now you have more choices. You can roll it over to an IRA and control your fees. But if you don't know about it, how can you do that? And boy, those fees add up. Maybe not so much when the market's raging, but when it's going down, that's insult to injury. And when we shine that light and people see it for the first time, that's eye-opening. And to your point, Rob, yeah, if you think you should just go to these big name places and do the same thing you've always done, it's because they're not educating you on different things that you could pay attention to without having to take more risk.
Yeah.
Really crucial.
So maybe when you're looking at this type of planning and some of the differences for planning for today, it's more important to not necessarily focus on what institution you're working with, but really, I think what you all are saying is what is that institution doing for you? Where if you're at a big, wire house, brokerage house, those firms are typically good at helping you accumulate the money, build the pile of money bigger. But it sounds like what you're saying, Rob, and from your experience, and I know Phil and I see this all the time, what they're dropping the ball on is that distribution phase, having a defined plan, allocating your portfolio properly, watching fees, balancing risk, all those types of variables.
I mean, that's exactly it, because when you're in that accumulation mode, which most people do most of their life, and it's completely different in regards to retirement. But the point behind that is if you do go with the big companies, it's going to be basically 100% risk-based, which if the market goes well for the rest of their life, they'll be fine. But as you start to actually distribute funds to yourself in a vehicle that's going down in value, that could be catastrophic. I mean, it's like having a hole in the boat and pouring water in there. It's not doing you any bit of good, and you'll never be able to catch back up. So how you safely withdraw your money is really beneficial to your financial well-being.
So for somebody who's listening, if you're within 10 to 15 years of retirement, the point that you're making is if all that you're being told, regardless of the name of the institution, is keep on saving, keep on growing. You're not talking about tax planning. You're not talking about how to distribute the money safely. You're not telling them the risk that's involved or the fees that are involved. These are all practical things that you need to know. If that's the case, you really want to look beyond that and perhaps explore other resources for distribution planning, because it's an entirely different game. I always tease people, that's why I'll be 100 and still be screaming about this, because I think that it's just really overlooked in our industry. And I've never gotten me out. I know Jordan's laughing too.
Well, nobody wants you to go anywhere for sure. But it's one of those things that I always say, if you're not having the tough conversations, meaning like the tax planning, the estate planning, the legacy planning, the rest of your life planning, you're not having those conversations. Those aren't comfortable conversations. That should be a red flag. If you're hearing things like, well, don't worry about that loss, it's a paper loss. The market comes back, it'll always come back. Don't worry. You've always got your best interest in mind. Those aren't actual answers to any questions, right? Those are just kicking the can down the road conversations. Those are things that to me would raise the hair on my neck. Like, man, I need to look into something else. And because people have heard it for sure, especially if they've ever talked with me. But it makes sense when people go to climb Mount Everest, right? They would hire a guide. But nobody knows that when they get to the top, they hire someone else to get to the bottom. And the reason why is because it's way harder to get down the mountain than it is to go up. So that's kind of what a distribution specialist does, right? They hold your hand and they walk with you hand in hand all the way to the finish line. And it's much more challenging, and it's got to be right. There's no mistakes.
Rob, for someone who's listening to this right now, what are a couple of ways that they could, because if you go talk to your advisor, sometimes they don't even know what the fees are, or they think their planning is perfect because they're usually biased. What are some things you can do on your own to kind of give yourself a mental checklist for, maybe I do need a second opinion. Maybe I do need to get a different set of eyes on what I'm doing to make sure I'm doing the right stuff. What are some things when you're meeting with clients in the office, if they're trying to uncover is this a problem or is this not a problem? What's kind of their North Star? What do you think they could look for?
Obviously, we're meeting with them. We have the tools and the stuff to really help and shine the light. But if we're not, and they're just listening to this and we've never actually met with them, whatever it may be, candidly speaking, I would really just take a look at my accounts, right, and see. To me, it may not sound like a red flag to some, but it would be to me. Hypothetically, let's say that you have $1 million in a retirement account, and if the market went up 10, 15%, and you went up 10 or 15%, that could be a red flag, because then if you looked somewhere during a time period, like for example, last year in 2022, if the market went down, whatever, 22, 23%, if you went down 22, 23%, that means that you're doing what the market does. And that sounds like a good thing. But the problem is when the storms come, it's not a good thing, especially when you're in that distribution phase.
I would ask that advisor, what things do I need to do differently now that I'm getting to the distribution phase? And if your advisor says, well, let's just continue to do what we've been doing, boy, that's a red flag.
I want to highlight that real quick, Phil, because I hear people say that all the time. They've asked their advisor, what should I do? And they say, we'll plan for that when you get closer, or keep doing what you're doing.
Makes me sick.
If you're hearing that right now from your advisor, whoever, you need to get a second opinion from somebody. I've had clients before I've met with in the office. They've retired. They've actually retired and have told their advisor, okay, when do we start doing the planning? And the advisor has literally said before, this happened to me 3 times in my career, we'll do that later, after they've already retired.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's crazy.
Way too much. Absolutely.
Anytime you don't get a direct answer, that should be a red flag.
I would say this, if you're close to retirement and if you're thinking about it and your advisor has never brought these things to your attention, that should be a red flag. Get a second opinion and see where it goes from there.
What I've found too, a lot of people who have an advisor, it's difficult sometimes thinking about how are you going to break up with them, so to speak. Uncomfortable conversations sometimes. And the question that I always ask myself is, what's more important, your money, your retirement, or the relationship you have with your advisor? If the answer is the money, there's your answer. Or if you're thinking about, okay, I've got this advisor who I like, what I would ask you is this. If you saw your portfolio had too high of fees, too much risk, bad allocation, no planning, and no strategy, and you had no advisor with that money, would there be any hesitation in doing something different with it? And the answer is always no. But when it comes to the advisor, it's, oh, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to. But where I always go to is, what decision is more important to you, your success or making your advisor feel okay, where when the grand scheme of things, not always, but they probably don't care that much.
Even if they do care, if that's what they believe, if you're an advisor believes this is the way you should be invested and you have too much risk, if the market goes down, ask yourself, ask the advisor, are they going to give you back the money that you lost? Are they? Right. I'm not, but I'm going to plan right.
And I, again, taking the math side of things, or the engineering, if you would, side of things, is I say just try to take the emotion out of it, right? Meaning like, if you can you reduce your fees? Yeah, maybe you can, maybe you can't, don't know. Can you reduce your risk? Almost always we know that to be true. And can you get close to or match or maybe even beat that average performance? Well, if you can answer yes to those 3 questions, mathematically, it's an absolute no-brainer. Doesn't mean you can still get out of your own way emotionally, but at least you got the logic behind it. And it doesn't mean it has to be a bad breakup. You know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things. Everything leads you to something else. And so, you get rid of a car that you had for 5 years. It was an amazing car, but now you've got a better car. It's the same thing. Like, if you're going to break up with an advisor that you have a great relationship with, while it's not going to be great, it's okay to thank them for what they've done for you to this point. But at this point, you need to look out for what's best for your family moving forward. Now,
Rob, you're unique in that you're married to the woman who was probably the first ever girlfriend that you had, right? Yeah. Or one of.
That is true.
Phyllis, I don't know about you and Harry, and I met my wife freshman year in college. And when you break up with somebody, it's uncomfortable. And it's difficult, but do you feel better afterwards? A sense of relief?
A tremendous amount of experience in that I would say, yeah, for sure.
I'll let you know after tonight.
Oh, Mary's not listening to this. Anyway, that's where I think a lot of people go to, is it's when you're making decisions about your retirement, it has to be objective. It has to be based off of math, data, facts, not the uncomfortable feelings that are associated with it, because those uncomfortable feelings oftentimes lead to an action, and an action leads to times where a client runs out of money. They're paying so much in fees over a 20-year period of time that they have to cut their income in half in 15 years from now. It's different variables like that where there's two types of pains. There's the pain of discipline, and then there's the pain of regret. And the pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret is, especially when it comes to your money, because with retirement, do we get a reset button?
You do not.
We don't.
That's it.
Rob, I have a question for you.
I'm a Virgo. O positive blood. Oh, that wasn't it? I'm sorry.
No, are we going to get some more taste of retirement videos at some point too? Tell us about your cooking experience and really, what led you to financial services and what you like about it.
It's kind of a crazy story, but and a long one, so pack a lunch. But I'm the youngest of three, and my parents always made us get a job of some sort, whatever it may be. And my brother and sister chose to be what are they called? They bag groceries at Kroger, and that's a fine job. It's just something that I never saw myself doing. I mean, you got to be outside getting the carts, whatever. I'm not doing that. Anyway, so I decided I'd go be a busboy at a restaurant. And so my mom picked me up from football practice. We drove up and down a busy road in Louisville, and I got a job as a buster at Macaroni Grill and making fine money. I don't know, $200 a week, whatever it may be. One particular Saturday, I was rolling silverware for that afternoon service, and a bunch of our kitchen staff decided not to show up for work. And that's a thing that happens every now and then. And so the general manager came up to me and he said, do you know how to cook? And I was like, I have no idea, man. I'm 15 years old. I've made English muffin pizzas before, but that's about it. He's like, well, you're going to cook today. And so he threw me on the line. And I just kind of learned by fire. And I went from there to a French restaurant, and I was the youngest sauté cook there. Then I went from there to a steakhouse and then an Italian restaurant. And then I went to work for one of the world's biggest companies that's big here in Houston called Cisco Foods. And so that led me to cook in a bunch of crazy places and with a bunch of amazing people. I got to cook at the James Beard House in New York. For those that don't know it, they should look it up. It's pretty cool. Now, the ceiling in that kitchen's 6 foot and I'm 6'2", so that was a bit of a struggle. But other than that, at the same time, I was missing something. I didn't know what I wasn't missing. It's kind of like what you don't know. And all during that time period, well, I'll say this. My dad got to retire young, which is great. But the reason why he retired young is because my mom had cancer. So it was a cancer that wasn't going to go away. And so they wanted to spend as much time as they could doing whatever it is they wanted to do while her health was still good. And so they were fortunate enough to find a financial advisor that came up with a game plan that they could do just that. They could travel. They could spoil the grandchildren. They could spoil themselves. And that's exactly what they did for like 5 years. They went like their hair was on fire. And I'm talking about trips to Alaska, cruises, Europe, even a couple Star Trek conventions, which is really weird, but whatever, And so after about 5 years, the cancer started to get worse. And at that point, it was time to pivot and come up for a game plan for life without my mom. Same advisor came up with a plan that my dad still uses to this day. Still gets to travel, not as much now as he's getting older, still gets to spoil the grandchildren, still gets to spoil himself. And my mom, she passed away in September of 2012. So obviously that was a hard time for me and my family, but it was a really hard time for my dad. My parents have been together over 40 years, so they did everything together. But I noticed that whatever my dad needed, his advisor was there to back him up. And so about the time of the funeral, I said to my wife, that's what I want to do. I want to impact other people's lives the way that he has impacted ours. So some people know it, some people don't. But Dustin Stanley, who happens to be one of the partners of this firm, he and I have been really, really good friends for a really, really long time. And so we were talking about that one day, and he said that you should come work with us. All we do is help people have fun and exciting retirements. So my wife and I, we talked about it, and we prayed about it. And almost a decade later, here I am.
That's so cool, Rob. You know what's interesting to me? I just had a thought, because if you're trying to figure out who to work with, or if you're trying to evaluate your advisor, the math matters. Obviously, the math matters. To me, though, there's one characteristic that I think has just as much of an impact as the math formula does. And Rob, you just said it right there. It's authenticity. How many advisors have you met before that don't care about the client, that are only trying to do what's best for them and not what's best for their clients? And to me, if you're out there and you're trying to evaluate who you should be working with to ensure as successful of a retirement possible, it's figuring out who's authentically there for the right reasons and who's not. And if you can have that as a guiding principle for your retirement planning, choosing the person usually influences whether or not your retirement's successful. So making sure that that's a high character, authentic person who's there for the right reasons, that to me stands as high as anything else does.
That's a really good point. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that, God gives us the ability to have intuition. Now, sometimes we ignore it, which is a problem. But when you are talking to somebody, it's very rare that you are completely blindsided. You know what I mean? In regards to their true character and who they are. You end up having, you meet with somebody over the course of 5-6 hours, given, however you've met with them. You've spent time together, right? They know who you are. They've heard you mess up. They've heard you sniffle. They've heard the bad jokes, the good jokes, all the things. I would agree with you, Jordan. If somebody's truly authentic, that'll come across. And candidly, I really just want the people that I meet with to, in their hearts, believe that I, in my heart, believe 100% that we can help them out. And if they do that, then there'll be no problems.
It's really cool.
Conviction. Yeah. Work with someone who has conviction and then can back it up with real numbers.
And I think also along the way, look for the themes of what they're saying. Are they focusing on talking over your head, or are they focused on educating you, making sure you understand where they're coming from and what they're trying to do? I really like that. Hey, Rob, this was a ton of fun today, buddy. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about your origin story and really for people out there as they are on their journey to have a successful retirement. For the people who don't do their own investments, finding that advisor is, if not the biggest part of the journey, one of the biggest parts of the journey. So thanks very much, Rob. This was awesome.
My pleasure.
All right, guys, take care.
You've been listening to the RPU Podcast with Jordan Schwartz and Phillis Polvinas.